Welcome to my Bit Retro Journal. This is another video celebrating the Amiga in the month of May via hashtag Amiga. And for this video, what I want to do is show you something that I actually had to, that occurred that I had to do recently on the Amiga. So now just to set the stage, I have an Amiga 600. I don't yet have a hard drive for it. In fact, the cable that's right here is bad, kind of, sort of. You saw the last video you did on this. I was trying to put drives like an IDE on there, and that was very difficult. I took a long time trying to get it to work, not realizing that this cable was actually bad. Some of the pins were shorting out, and I've since tried to fix it, but it's still sort of flaky. I have ordered an IDE to compact flash card, but it's not going to get here until mid-June. Well, parts of it are going to get here mid-June. The other parts are going to get here mid to late July. So supposedly, I originally ordered an AliExpress and they canceled it twice. So I found those parts on eBay. So they are hard to come by. So I was working on the hard disk. And I just have these floppy disks, 5 floppies for WorkbBench 2.1 that Chris Edwards sent me because I didn't have anything actually that came with the computer. In fact, the computer didn't even have a power supply or a floppy. I added all that. And so I was not able to do anything until I got these. And then once I got these, with the installed disk, which has HD toolbox, I was able to start trying to configure the hard drive. Well, it was frustrating enough that at one point I changed the device from SCSI.device to, I forget what it was called, tape something.device, and it actually finally showed up and allowed me to do, I forget it was 2 or 20 megabytes. And so I tried it, and it was actually the floppy drive that it had seen, and it destroyed my disk. This is the disk it destroyed because I hadn't locked it. And so now I was SOL because I couldn't. I had nothing to I mean, if you don't have the disk with just an Amiga floppy and no solid state, you can't interface with it. Well, it's not quite true. So what I discovered is, and you can see right here, that I have the extras disk, which along with WorkbBench 2.1 allows you to boot the DOSDriver for a PC floppy. And so that's what I ended up actually doing. I used the WinUAE emulator to find the ADF file for WorkbBench 2.1, the version that I had, 38.36, I think. And I moved all of the files to a floppy, and then the floppy onto my Amiga using the DOSDriver, which I was able to see, and then copied that onto the RAM disk, and then slowly copied it onto a freshly formatted install 2.1 disk. The mistake I made is I didn't make backup copies of this. And that worked actually really well. And what I really discovered is that the file system on the Amiga, all the files are all text-based. So even executables are special. That's not the case with all file systems. For instance, the Macintosh has both a data and a resource fork that are part of the file system. So you cannot store them just as flat text files. On the QL, they're mostly text files except for executables that have a small bit of information. I think it's data size that tells it how much space to have in the heap in the first track of the tracks that, or the sector that makes up the sectors of the what's on the media. So I rebuilt this with using the DOSDriver and one file at a time. Again, now you might go, well, why don't you just find some other way? There's easy ways of doing this. Well, I did finally. I have another way of doing this that will actually recreate this disk exactly the way it should, which is Disk Masher, DMS, that allows me to do this on a 1 megabyte machine. I tried ADF Blitzer, and I think it's the newer version is called ADF Ref. I tried ADF to disk, and there's one other one, but all of them require either a second floppy or more than 1 megabyte of memory. There was some discussion in forums that suggested that you could take an ADF file and zip it up and call it ADZ, but the newest version of ADF Blitzer wouldn't work. It didn't have enough memory, and then ADF Ref, which is a newer version, I tried it and I just didn't understand what an ADZ file was. But Disk Masher, DMS, actually allows you to not only grab the disk image and it'll compress it for you about 50%. 880K goes, actually more than 50, goes to about 380K. But that was still not enough, because when I put it on the RAM disk, which then takes up about half of my free memory, Disk Masher running tries to load that 380 into memory, and it just runs out of memory. And so what Disk Masher allows you to do is it allows you to do it in chunks. So I actually grab the first 40 tracks of the disk and the next 40 tracks, and then I have 290K chunks, and they all, both of them plus Disk Masher, fit on a DOS floppy. I can then copy Disk Masher and one of the chunks onto my RAM disk and then build my installed disk from there. And I'm going to show you how to do that at the very end of the video, just because there were no videos out there that showed you how to. And it's valuable because if you only have an Amiga with 1 meg of memory and you don't yet have invested in a IDE to SD, which you know should get, but if you don't have it, like I won't have it until end of summer likely, then you can create your own floppies of games or any other free ADF software that's in ADF format on the web. It's pretty easy and it's pretty quick, and you'll see how quickly it's done. Before I do that though, what I want to show you is when I didn't do that and I did it by hand, it was actually important to learn how to do that, because back in the early 90s, when the web wasn't available and you didn't really have as much proliferation of software, all you had was what came with the system. So you could still do it if you had a copy of the original set of files on, some other means that you could, maybe someone could email them to you or etc. Well, what I want to demonstrate to you is that although you could do that, the shell environment on the original Amiga was not really as great as it could have been. There was no means to script it easily, and I know there's AREX on here, but it's not part of the shell. And just using the disk operating system was a pain, because you had to just swap disks like crazy. Every time you did a directory listing, it didn't remember the dir command. In fact, what I ended up doing is there's a nice feature under WorkbBench that says show all files. You have to select a directory. So if I open up empty and I do which is empty, and I do a show all files, it'll show all files, even the ones without icons, and then you can copy and paste using this technique. And then you can also there's a rename command, etc. And so that's actually how I did it. Except the one issue when you're using a DOS PC disk is that you only have 8 characters with a dot and a 3-character suffix. So a lot of those files that I had, I needed to change their names. I used WinUAE, looked at what it looked like there. So there was a lot of sort of back and forth. It was really slow, but I was able to recreate, and this is actually the disks right now, recreate it, and it works for the most part. There are still some nuances. For instance, you can't get every character on the keyboard that's part of the character set, and one of the nuances is that the languages like Espanol use a special N with a tilde on top of it, and there's no way I could create that. And that's where I ran into using the WorkbBench's shell, and it showed me how limited it is, and even the wildcarding mechanism, there was no easy way of doing this. I have since found a better shell called Z shell, but again, I always like to sort of use the computer as it came from the manufacturer, because that's how many folks in the 90s used the computer. And so the limited ability of the shell, the fact that it required constantly you swap like crazy the WorkbBench disks so that it could have, every time you did a directory, swap, every time you did a copy, swap, and it would not cache those commands after a first use. And there's probably a way to copy them over to the RAM disk, but at the same time, I hadn't figured out how to do that yet. So as good as it was that I could recreate this disk just using the DOS floppy and the DOSDriver, the shell was something to be desired. And I'm going to show you on the QL how the QL shell, which is 48K, is both the shell, the operating system, and its scripting language, which is BASIC. I can do that. And so even though the QL's interface is not great, and the Amiga definitely did a better job with regard to the GUI integrated with a command shell. The Mac didn't have that. A lot of computers didn't have graphical interfaces. The QL, its command shell, even though it doesn't have a nice windowing environment, still is much better. I'll show you how I could solve my problem in the QL very quickly that I couldn't do on the Amiga. Now, yes, you can just get a new shell like Z shell, and on the QL, which has its shortcomings, you could just get it both a graphical environment like ICE and its own shell. There were plenty out there as well. These are both computers with enough memory and horsepower where you can do that. But I just wanted to show you what came with these machines embedded. And the other nice thing about the QL is all its commands, disk operating system commands are in memory because it's all ROM based. And so that was done out of necessity because they didn't use a floppy, they used a cartridge. And because of that, they knew this would be so slow that they really worked hard on having it all in ROM. And it's only 48K of ROM, whereas the Amiga has a much bigger ROM, and yet just incessantly requires you to use a floppy. And so it works much better nowadays because you can put an IDE to compact flash card. But man, it must have been crazy especially in the 80s with the Amiga 1000. And if you only had one floppy. Now, a friend of mine told me Amigas, you never only had one floppy. But if you only had one floppy, it must have just been painful to use the Amiga with regard to anything using the disk operating system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a little bit of shortcomings of the shell here, and then show you how you do it in the QL, and then I'll show you the Disk Masher software because it's really cool to use. I'm going to rearrange the camera so that I have a nice close-up. All right, so here's my new setup. Now, just to show you, I've got, if I go to VGA, this will be the same workbench, but it's going to be on my Windows machine, running WinUAE, and then I have on TV mode, I have the QL. And so the first thing to show you is I want to just quickly show you one of the shortcomings on the Amiga. So one of the problems that I had was that if I pop out this disk, and put in the workbench disk. Now, again, I have this already in RAM disk, but when you don't have it in RAM disk, so let me open up my RAM disk. I'm going to move these three things out of the way just so you get a clearer picture of it. I'm doing a show all, that's why you can see all this stuff. So the Espanol I got off of my recreated install 2.1 disk, and the Espanol.language, it's actually, if you do, one of them has an icon and the other one doesn't. That's why I had to do that. Didn't actually. I didn't realize it didn't do that. Well, I'll just do this very quickly. But so one idea I had, if I open up the Workbench and quickly open up, it's under Systems, the shell. So this is a shell that comes with it. As I said, I have found a better shell called Z shell, and I'm sure there's other ones out there. Z shell gives you sort of more standard command line interfaces, which I like. It uses regular wildcarding and not the strange one. And again, can't blame Amiga for using their own, because back then, other than MS-DOS, it wasn't necessarily as clear. But so here's what I wanted to do, is I had this Espanol file, which was one that was incorrectly, doesn't have the tilde. And there's no way to copy this onto this. I mean, you can hit the old rename, and but there's no way to grab that. There's no, there's no control. There's no copy built into Workbench. So what I was going to do is I was just going to rename. I had the idea of just renaming this to something like old. And then renaming this to what I actually wanted. Oops, yeah, still kind of learning. And so this would have been and then get rid of the language stuff. Okay, and so now I have the right file name, and but it has the wrong contents. If I could copy what's in old into Espanol, I would have the, this is what I would do in Unix. And so I thought, oh, well, let's use the, let's move these in the background, I guess. Yep. And so I thought, well, what if I just, CD onto the RAM disk? Oops. So the keyboard's still not. And so then I have my Espanol, and I think I have to do list. I think that lists all the files. What I wanted to do was copy, I can just copy old info to, and again, you can't do file completions. There's no file completions. But I thought, well, maybe I could do, and it's there is hashtag, which is this guy, and then question mark. So just copy it to the thing that has the you have environment, so there would be confusion. But let's do S and then hashtag question mark, because that's sort of the wildcard mechanism. And so copy old info into that, and it would copy the information in old info into that, and it'll actually do it. But it'll just say wildcard destination invalid. So it won't let you do that. So the and so there was no way to do any sort of cutting and pasting here, and there was no way to there's no copy. Yeah, so not having copy and paste a clipboard kind of makes this difficult. And so and if there is one and I don't know about it, please post. But so that was sort of a shortcoming. Plus the other thing is, if you're trying to do things not using the command shell, the AmigaShell, constantly, and using 2 disks, so I'm using the RAM disk now, I constantly have to pop in the WorkbBench disk. If I'm doing this on the install disk with the WorkbBench disk, every time you do a dir, it would be like, pop in the WorkbBench disk and then pop it, and then you would get the directory listing. There's insanity in that was not fun to work with. And so I want to show you on the QL how I would have done that. So let's go move over to the QL. And so on the QL, again, the picture isn't going to be great, but on the QL, let me show you that there's a built-in programming language, and what you can do is it has a full-featured, so I can go, by the way, the thing I'm showing you at the top is actually the shell that I wrote for it, and I can, let me just get this out of the way briefly, and then I'll come back to that. But what I can do is I can write a program for I equals 1 to 255, and I can print every character CHR I semicolon comma semicolon, and then run that program, and you'll see that I can get every single character. Now again, the picture shimmers, but it's literally every character. And so if I do a print CHR $137, I actually get that's the end with the tilde character up. It's hard to see, but that's actually the character that I want. So then I could do something like, MDV6. We're used to typing MDV2, before we had the drive. All right, so let's say I have CL, the CL program. So I could do a rename CL, MDV6. I'm typing at an angle, so it's really hard. To in quotes, MDV6 S, and here I could do concatenate with CHR $137, concatenate with OL, and that will actually rename CL. And again, the picture is very shimmery right now, so I apologize, but it's just going through RF. If I do mode 8 color mode, and then clear the screen and do a directory on MDV6, you'll see that Espanol now is actually there with the tilde N on there. So it allowed me to do that using this command shell environment. Now if I go back to mode 4, I just wanted to show you that for those that are like, but you can just get a different shell. Well, this is the shell that I actually wrote. It's not fully implemented. If I do a dir, it actually has just hard-coded values in there. But it was a prototype that I wrote for the Mac. But yeah, I just wanted to show you that this is actually a language that I implemented myself, and I kind of followed the same syntax that the QL had, because that's what I knew. And so I can actually literally write the same program I just wrote on the QL in this shell, but it's actually not running QDOS. It's running mine, and this is actually the base code I use for my ZX simulator. And if I do that and run it, you'll see that it does the same thing. It runs a little slower, but it basically does the same character code sequence. It's using the built-in character mapping, which is not ASCII for the QL, but it's pretty close. And again, 137 is still N tilde. And so, yeah, and the shell that I wrote on the Mac back in '92 is actually better than the AmigaShell, because it has some features like piping and this ability to have a built-in scripting language to do that. So again, just a little bit of a shortcoming, but that the Amiga folks missed the boat. And let me show you again the power of because this is a full-featured programming language, so you can do other things. And I'm going to just show you a scatter plot program. It can do graphics, and this will do a little scatter plot program. Oops, it wasn't found. So this was just a simple little scatter plot program that, and you would say, I don't know, 444, and it'll actually go and do a little scatter plot for it. In any case, so let me now go and show you, the meat of this will be, even though I've already wasted 25 minutes or so, I want to show you how to use disk masher, because it's pretty easy to use. And so going on to the, so this is a WorkbBench, same WorkbBench on Amiga, but it's in WinUAE. And so what you can do is, I've already installed this under utilities, called DMS. And again, it came out in 1991, so I'm going to have to do show all. And so the way this works is you basically just put your disk in. And so what I need to do is I need to actually, right, and so it's right in here. May not be as visible. Yeah, so unfortunately, it's not quite as visible. Yeah, so, but what I'm doing is I'm going to hit the floppy drive, and I'm going to enter the install version, which is right here. So this is the same one. And then I can just hit OK, and then the install floppy will pop in here. So now what I can do is run this command, and here I can say read and give it a file name. And I'm going to use the 8.3 character format for DOS. Install 21, and I could do the whole thing, but again, the 380 is too big for a 1 megabyte machine. So I'm going to do the first 40 tracks. And then you can do low 0 track to high 39 track. If the low is 0, then it's defaulted. So you do that, and it's going to ask you to return. And then I'll just quickly read those. And it's finished, so just rinse and repeat for the high order. So again, I've gotten half of this, so I'm going to run it again. And this time, again, I'm going to do a read and a new file, DNS 21. I'm going to call it 80 for the second half, DMS. And again, I could say low, well, low is 40, and then I can say high is 79. So you can do ranges, but again, since I'm doing the rest of it, so say OK, and I'll fast forward again. All right, it finished. So now all I need to do is copy these two that have now. I think I need to where you refreshed as you go only, and then you do show all, and that should idiosyncrasies. I've got these two. I'm going to copy this whole thing into a floppy because the whole thing takes up only about 400K. And so let me I'll just transition to that after I copy it over to speed things up. So I've got the untitled floppy in here, and basically all I have to do is copy things from here to my RAM disk. And again, let me, I can probably get rid of this and that. Since that was really only for demonstrating. And then from here, I should show all, and then I'm only going to copy DMS and the first one, which is this 140. You want to copy both because memory is at a premium, and so you don't want to take up too much of the RAM disk, since you are copying into memory. But once you have that, you're basically going to, I'm going to switch disks, and I might have to, yeah, it's copying about 400K on this, 300K. And once I do, I have a blank, this is basically an empty formatted floppy, and I'm going to, yeah, so it's copied over, and I think there it is. And so what I need to do now is just eject this disk. And this goes really quickly, so I'm really impressed with DMS. Again, an empty or unformatted floppy. This is actually just a one that hasn't been, yeah, it's just empty. It doesn't have anything on there. So now I'm just basically going to run DMS. And here I'm going to say write and give it the file name. So basically just do the opposite of what I did on WinUAE. Again, my keyboard, I'm waiting for the back plate. And then I'm going to give it, basically I could say low 0 to high 39. And this is going to write the disk. And it's going to say insert and yep, it took it took half a minute, so it didn't take too long at all. So now I just basically pop this out. So this is a very efficient way to do this, especially since you can do this on, I'm going to pop in my floppy disk. You can do this on WinUAE, and again, with a single floppy, just copy everything onto a DOS disk. And then, so it's important that you delete this one, because again, you're trying to keep memory to a premium. And you're going to then copy the other one, 80, on here. And rinse and repeat. Yeah, other than having to wait for the disk copy, I found that this was the easiest way and most reliable way to do all this stuff. And I will reboot with my new installed disk. So again, all you need really then at minimum is your WorkbBench 2.1 and your Extras 2.1 disk, and you're good to go. So DMS write, so disk masher write, install 2.1, the high, oops. Again, this keyboard works really well. It's just that without a backplate, oops. And we're going to say start from low 40, and we could say high 79, but we don't have to. You say OK, and it's going to come up and say I'm ready. And this time it's going to actually change the disk icon. So let me shrink this just so you can see what it's going to look like when it's done. And it's finished. If I close this, I think so this is the install disk now. So this is the one I just created, and it's indeed the proper install disk as you get from WorkbBench. If I turn this on and off, this will boot off of that disk now. And so, yeah, all you need is a 720K DOS floppy, and as long as you have WorkbBench and extras, you can create anything. For whatever reason, the DOSDriver does not work with install as the boot drive, so you do need WorkbBench. But those are the minimal disks that you can send someone, and then if they have a ton of floppies, they can create whatever they want. So this is actually, actually I can go here and it's running 38.36. And this will run HD2. HD. So this is I was using HD Toolbox as I showed in my last video, and it'll run. Everything's, So if you want to put games on there, you can. And this should also work on an Amiga 500 with 512K of RAM. You just might have to create, instead of 2 parts, you might have to create 4 or 8. The cool part, I was able to recreate initially my install disk with just the DOSDriver and copying it back and forth. I had to go through and rename a lot of files, which was a pain. And now Disk Masher is actually, I wish I had known that utility. I could have done this like literally in like 10 minutes, and I would have gotten everything back. So hopefully you find that helpful. Love my new Amiga. Still love my QL, and I'm learning from both. Found Z-Shell. If there's a better thing than Z-Shell that gives me even more Unix-like environment, let me know about that. Once I have my hard disk on here, I'm going to be using Z-Shell instead of AmigaShell. So yeah, I'm really excited to set this thing up to make this a wonderful little machine for me. All right, so thanks for joining me. Happy Amiga, and I'll see you next time.